Hello and welcome to day 16 of Vlogmas. Today we're going to be doing a slightly different type of video. I'm going to attempt to do a tutorial video for how to dye yarn with acid dyes, and the aim of this is that if you follow along with me, then at the end of the tutorial you should have a skein of yarn that looks like the skein of yarn that I'm going to dye. We are basically recreating one of my Advent 2019 colourways, which it was called Oxford Lights, and it was inspired by Christmas lights on Oxford Street. So it's a light grey base with multicoloured speckles. Yeah, so we're basically recreating something similar to that. Not exactly that, because I don't have a recipe and I'm using slightly less dyes for the speckles, but it should work. I'm going to start out with a few safety tips, because we're going to be using proper acid dyes. We're going to be using dyes from D&T Crafts. Now the lighting in here isn't brilliant, so this could take a second to focus. Let me see. Ah, there we go, that worked quite well. So these are from DT Craft and Designs, and you can see their website there. These are fantastic beginner dyes. They are really easy to work with. I'll give you some tips in terms of when we do the speckling later as well, and they're really readily available. They come in good, like, I think they come in smaller pots. I think they come in 10 gram, 25 gram and 100 gram pots. These are the 25 gram pots, so they're really easy if you just want to pick up a few colours to have a play at home. We're going to be using 4 colours: turquoise, magenta, black and yellow. And I was talking about safety tips. Because we're using proper acid dyes, they are very, very fine powders. So one of the really important things is to make sure you're doing it in a well-ventilated space, and it's also recommended that you wear some kind of face mask while you're doing it. You don't want to be breathing in those powders. So if you're just doing it as a hobby, just doing it very occasionally, not very often, then just a normal face mask is absolutely fine. If you're looking to do this like me as an indie dyer, then you want to wear something a bit more heavy duty, like a proper respirator. My respirator needs replacing because it got left in our garage and is now mouldy, and I'm not putting a mouldy respirator on my face. So I have been using a standard face mask, but it's definitely recommended to wear a proper respirator if you're going to be doing it more regularly. Also, if you're going to be handling the dyes, make sure you're wearing gloves as well. Yeah, that's the safety recommendations, I think. When you purchase any acid dyes, they should come with safety information that you can check through and make sure that you're happy with before you use them. What else will you need? I'm rushing through this a bit because I don't want the video to be too long, and I want to be able to share a decent amount of the processes. So you will need cling film. You will need possibly some little measuring spoons. You will need your 4 colours of dye. Obviously, if you want to create in a slightly different colour to what I'm doing today, then that would be fine too. You will need something to be able to measure liquid dye into, or to make liquid dye in. So you're looking at needing something in the way of a small measuring jug, maybe some syringes, or to be fair, you could probably just... That wasn't very good, was it? I'll get that back in a minute. Or you could just use a teaspoon or something like that. You don't need to be massively accurate for today. But yeah, that's what we're going to do. So what else do you need? Face mask I talked about. You'll need a saucepan and either a microwave or a steamer. All of the things that you use for dyeing yarn, once you've used them to dye yarn with acid dyes, you cannot use them again for food. So make sure that you've collected designated teaspoons, designated measuring cups, designated saucepans, stuff like that, that you're not going to use again for food. Right, I think that's everything. I'll make a list down below so that if I have forgotten anything, then as we go through, I can correct you. So the first thing we need to do is soak our yarn. Oh, there you go. There's something else you need. Yarn. The first thing we're going to need to do is soak our yarn. Now, acid dyes are called acid dyes because they need acid to help them set, not because they contain acid. I tend to just use vinegar, which you can easily pick up at the supermarket. You want distilled vinegar, so the white kind of vinegar, and you're going to soak your yarn for around half an hour in a solution of vinegar and water. The more yarn you put in, the more vinegar you need, but if you're just using one skein, then a good glug of vinegar, there's no massive science to it, will be absolutely fine. My yarn has been soaking all day, but you only need to soak it for about 30 minutes. And I am going to be using a skein that is 75% superwash merino, 20% nylon and 5% silver stellina, because I thought, why not? It's a festive skein, it should be sparkly. I'd recommend using a non-superwash, sorry, no I wouldn't, completely forget I said that because that's the opposite of what I recommend. I'd recommend using a superwash yarn if you're just starting out because you're much less likely to felt it. With superwash yarns they can take the handling, they can take the heat and they won't felt and you won't ruin it completely. So, first steps. While your yarn is soaking, you need to get some dye ready. You're going to want to make up a little bit of liquid dye. So I've got mine, I use my old vinegar bottles to store my liquid dye in. I make up my dyes using the black. In fact, you're only going to make up liquid dye of the black. So using the black dye, which I'm obviously leaking black dye everywhere. That's brilliant, isn't it? I make up a 1-to-1 ratio, so 1 gram of dye to 100 mils of water. And you want to do it with boiling water, so you're just going to put a tiny amount of dye in a mixing cup and add some boiling water. Again, for this, you don't need to be that accurate. You can just kind of measure a little bit, just put like, maybe put like 1/4 of a teaspoon in and add a couple of 100 mils of water, something like that, and that will work fine. And then once we've got your dye mixed up, and once we've got your yarn soaked for half an hour, we move on to the actual dyeing stage. Okay, so ignore the yellow pan, that's just some yarn that I'm dyeing up for myself for my crochet dragon. But we're going to be using this saucepan here. Again, these are ones that I specifically use for dyeing only and for nothing else. And the first thing we want to do is we're going to create a dye bath to give our base colour to our yarn. So what we want to do is add dye to this. Now, one of the really important things is always start with less and add more. You can always add more dye, you can always build up layers, but you cannot take it away once you've started. So this is my dye stock all made up. This is what I was saying, I do a 1-to-1 ratio. If yours isn't quite accurate, then don't worry, just start small. So I'm going to start with, let me have a little think, what am I going to start with? I'm going to start with 1 mil actually. I'm going to start with 1 mil of black dye, which I'm going to stick in here. I'm going to give it a swirl around. And then we're going to pop our yarn in. So just squeeze out the excess water from your yarn and then stick it in the pan. Now, my pans are a little bit small, so I might not get full coverage, but that's okay. I'm quite happy with my yarn being a little bit tonal. So you just give it a gentle stir. If you're using non-superwash yarn, do not do this. If you're using non-superwash yarn, put it in the pan and do not touch it. If you're using superwash yarn like me, then you're absolutely fine to give it a little bit of a stir, no worries. I am using a reusable cable tie, just to make handling my yarn easier. These are quite clever because they've got little clips so you can open and close them, which is brilliant. So that's just going to sit in there now for 10 minutes, something like that. What you're looking for is for this water in the pan to be completely clear, and that will let you know that the yarn has exhausted. So we just need to give that a little bit of time, and then judge your colour and decide whether you want to add more dye to the pan or whether you're happy with your colour. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more dye to my pan because I want a slightly deeper grey. So if you're trying to recreate what I'm trying to do, then go with that. So I'm just going to remove the yarn and add, how much did I put in? I put 1 mil in, didn't I? I'm just going to double what I put in before. I can't read my thing. There we go. So I'm going to add another mil in there, give it a bit of a stir around, and then put the yarn back in again. Ooh, I'm splashing it everywhere. There we go. And again, just leave that until that's exhausted. Okay, while you're waiting for your yarn to set, you can get your workspace sorted for doing the speckles. This isn't a technique that I tend to use very often for speckles at all. In fact, I haven't used this technique for absolutely years, but it's brilliant for a beginner and it can be very, very effective as well. So basically what I've done is I have lined my work surface with cling film, and what we'll do is once the yarn's ready, we'll put the yarn on the cling film and then we'll speckle it. Now, a good tip for speckling. The dyes as they come in the things, apologies about the lighting, we're in my garage and it's not brilliant. The dyes as they come are very, very fine powders and they're very tricky to speckle with. But what I find works really, really well is if you mix them with some table salt. So I actually need to make up a little bit more turquoise. So basically I tend to do a mix of about three tablespoons of salt, just standard table salt, to a 1/4 teaspoon of the dye powder, and then give that a good shake. As you can see, I'm reusing the old dye tubs to do this in. And then basically you use these salt mixes to speckle with, and you get really good, really nicely defined speckles, much more gentle speckles, rather than if you speckled straight with the powders, you'd end up with it quite blotchy. So that's my good tip. Mix your dye powders with salt. Once you're happy with your colour and your water's exhausted, then squeeze out as much of the water as you physically can, and then place your yarn on the cling film. I'd recommend waiting for it to cool down a bit before you handle it. Mine is still really, really hot, but it's fine either way. It's just easier to handle if it's cooled down. Spread it out a little bit. I'm going for quite random speckles, so I'm going to keep mine a little bit blotchy, kind of like that, just kind of shoved together a little bit. So look, I've already got turquoise dye powder now. Turquoise gets everywhere, I warn you. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your colours that are mixed with salt. So we're only mixing the turquoise, yellow and magenta with salt in this case. And you're going to take either a teaspoon, or if you're wearing gloves you can pinch and use your fingers. And we're just going to take a little bit. I'm actually only going to use about an 1/8 of a teaspoon. And I'm just going to tap gently and speckle over the yarn. I will give you a close-up in a minute once we've put all the colours on, and you'll be able to see the speckles developing. It might look at first like there's no speckles on there, but sometimes it can take a little while, well not long, but like a few seconds, for the colour to start coming out, especially if you've got your yarn quite dry. Now I've specifically picked my 3 colours, yellow, purple and turquoise. No, magenta, yellow and turquoise, because I know that they'll go well together, and if they do mix slightly then I'm not going to end up with horrible browny muddy mess. I'm just going to end up with kind of greens and purples and orange, like peachy kind of colours. So think about what colours you're going to use if you're not using the same colours as me. I'm actually going to put a bit more yellow on, I think. The yellow's not, oh that was a lot of yellow. There we go. So let me give you a bit of a closer shot. So you can see that the colours are kind of coming out, and you can see those speckles developing. There we go. And then what we're going to do next is turn it over, and this can be tricky. So one of the easiest ways to do it actually is if you kind of move your yarn. I should have put it in the, I should have said it at the start. Put your yarn down one end. If you move your yarn down one end of your cling film, then you can just flip it. So maybe start with your yarn down one end of the cling film. And then we're just going to repeat the exact same process. We're going to use those same 3 colours, and we're just going to speckle the other side. So that is our yarn all speckled now. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up in the cling film. So don't worry too much about it getting, I've just touched it, I'm going to be covered in dye now. Don't worry too much about it touching the cling film, that's fine, the speckles will still work. So we want to seal it up in there, and then we can just kind of roll it up, fold it up. And I'm going to steam mine. So you can do it in the microwave. If you're going to do it in the microwave, then you need to be really careful. You need to do it at very, very, very short bursts at a time. So you're looking at kind of 30 seconds at a time. It's really easy to burn it in the microwave. I much prefer to steam it if I'm doing it like this. So I have this ancient steamer. I use this for making sure that my self-striping is set, and I'm just going to fill the bottom with water, stick it on the hob with the yarn in the top section, and then I will steam it for about 30 minutes just to make sure that those speckles have set. To set acid dyes you need 2 things, you need acid and you need heat. So once it's set for 30 minutes then it should be fine. Once your yarn has steamed for about half an hour, then let it cool down, which I haven't done, mine is still hot, but it's probably best to let it cool down. In fact, you could leave it to cool overnight if you wanted to, it wouldn't do it any harm at all, and it might even give you some extra setting time. And then you're just going to undo the cling film. There will be some excess dye on your cling film, most likely, but yeah, you just want to undo your cling film, unwrap your yarn. Oh, I'm using the worst cling film. There we go. And there is our yarn. And then what we're going to do is just give it a quick rinse, a quick soak. So I've got in this bucket here, can you see it's still steaming? In this bucket here, I've got just some water, it's cold water. And I've added a little bit of soak, which is a wool wash that you don't need to rinse out afterwards. I use soak for soaking all of my shop yarns as well. I like the smell of it. And you're literally just going to take your yarn, stick it in there, give it a little bit of a rinse. You're basically just washing out that excess vinegar and any excess dye that might be on there. To know that your yarn is set, if you're worried about that, you can tell from the water, because my water's all clear. Can you see that there? The water is all clear, so no, there's no dye going into the water from the yarn. So I know that that's all set. My speckles have all set. It doesn't need long, just a quick swish, and then squeeze out as much water as possible. Now I have an electric spinner which squeezes all my water out, but I imagine that most of you at home don't have one of those. So what I used to do, and what is a really handy way of drying yarn quickly, squeeze out all the excess water you can, stick your yarn in a towel, roll it up as tightly as you can, and then press on it, or get your kids to stand on it. My kids love jumping on it, or jump on it yourself if you fancy it. You're basically just trying to squeeze out as much water as you can from that skein of yarn. And there it is, our skein of hand-dyed yarn with its lovely delicate speckles because we used the salt. You can see how that salt really helps with those speckles. And we're just going to hang this up to dry. And then hopefully it will be dry enough tomorrow morning that I can show you what you do with regards to skeining it and show you what it looks like dry. Okay, it is now the next day and I've got my skein of yarn here, fresh off the drying rack. And I'm going to just share how you skein it, because I know that's something that people can find a little bit tricky. So excuse the fact that my head is cut off, but you want to be able to see my body and the yarn rather than my face during this bit. So if your skein looks a little bit tangly or anything like that, don't panic. Just find your ties. There should be a number of ties on your skein, and you can just check. If you pull the tie, you can just check and make sure that all the yarn inside the ties is going in the right direction. If you've got any tangles or if you've got any difficulties, you'll find there'll be a loop of yarn over top of the tie, and that just needs to go kind of the other side, if that makes sense. And you can check all your ties. You'll find that you've got two different types of tie. So there's one tie that is literally just 2 strands of yarn, and that is just a tie to secure the yarn. And if you're caking up the yarn, you can remove that, no worries. The other type of tie you'll have has 4 bits of yarn coming out of it. Sorry, dodgy camera work there. The other type of yarn you've got has got 4 bits of yarn coming out of it, and that will be the end of the yarn. So that will be where you want to start winding from. So if you are a little bit tangly, you can just give it a good thwack, as I like to say. So just put your hands inside your loop of yarn and you're just going to snap it like that. It'll neaten out those bits. Don't remove the ties, obviously, before doing this. You only want to remove the ties when you're ready to cake it up. And then we're going to skein it. So you want to have your hands in the loop with your hands inside and your thumbs on the outside. At least this is how it works for me. And then what you're going to do is you're going to twist this right hand, or if you're left-handed you can do it the other way. You're going to twist your right hand kind of like this, basically. Hold this one secure, keep twisting. At some point the loop will get tight and your fingers will start coming out. That's fine. Just slip down so that you've got one finger, I use my middle finger, inside the loop, and keep going until it's tight. You want to keep tension on it, because what you don't want to do when it gets to this stage is let it go and end up with a lumpy bit in there that you can't get back out again. So I'll do that again. You want to just keep twisting with this hand. I find for me it's quite a lot of elbow movement and wrist movement. And then when it's tight, keep it tight. And then what I do is I use my elbow. So I will then bring the skein down and hold it tight between my elbow and my chest. Bring this bit up so that they're meeting. Keep this tight here. Pop your finger in to secure the skein. That's my alarm telling me I need to do something with my yarn. Pop your finger in to secure the skein. Again, the important thing is to really keep this tight. Once you've got the top secured, you can let go of that bottom. It'll spin round, and then you'd want to give that a little bit, and you just want to feed that end. That was really rubbish. Should we try that again? It's because I got distracted by my phone. See, I'm out of practice because most indie dyers nowadays use electric skein twisters, so I'm out of practice of doing this already. So spin, twist, 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 all the way until it's nice and tight. Then you're going to pop it under your arm. That's what I did wrong. I go this way. Pop it between your elbow and your tummy, and then you're going to meet the bits up. And again, just pop your finger in there to hold the tension until you're ready. And then give that one last twist and pop the loose end through the other end. That's a bit better, isn't it? There we go. And then you've got one skein of yarn. And then here is the yarn that we dyed. Hopefully this tutorial worked okay and it all came out well. If you've got any questions, just let me know and I'll do my best to answer them. And I hope you're happy with whatever yarn you've come up with.